So this is the afternoon of our last break, and unfortunately I have also some bad news for you, which Michael told me to tell, so it's on him, but you can blame him and complain to him, but we are not going to have the last coffee break because so many people are leaving in advance. So then if you need to use the restroom or something, you can just try to go during the presentation whenever you see that there's the good moment for that. Yes, so we will move on to our second to last session, which is session 8 on the integration of accounts for analytical purposes. And for this, we have a chair from Statistics Sweden, which we met already. So Susanna, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here on this session on integration of accounts for analytical purposes, a topic that certainly has been touched upon in several discussions in the last few days. We talked about tourism, circular economy, ecosystems, and sort of integration of accounts is the unique selling point of the unique selling point of the SIA accounts. So very happy to be able to dig into the details of this. So this session will start with some reflections on this topic from OECD, and then we have some country examples from Ireland, Sweden, and the Netherlands. And then the session ends with a short panel discussion, including a Q&A. So please save your questions till the end. So also for time management, since these are the sort of last sessions on this seminar, we're going to keep the panel quite short so that you can ask all your questions to the presenters. So we're going to start directly with some reflections from OECD. And Daniel Clarke is going to present. And Daniel Clarke is currently a researcher analyst for the OECD in the National Accounts Division, focusing on SIA. Previously, he worked as a statistician for the United Nations for the SIA team and at the UN Regional Commission for Asia and the Pacific. So please, Daniel, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to just say a quick thanks as well to the organizing committee, and especially to Nils, who we'll hear from in a few moments here, for sort of believing in this session, which is maybe somewhat of an unconventional topic, a session topic, but as the Chair just said, it's something we've touched on. We naturally touch on quite a bit throughout the seminar, but I think it was, even if it's a bit of an unconventional topic for a session, I believe it's an important session to reflect on how we are doing in this unique sort of value added of the SIA, because I do feel like we may have lost touch a little bit over time with this unique value of SIA, not only for integration of environmental economic data, which of course everybody knows is sort of one of the key objectives of the system, but also integration between the different types of accounts, which was part of the original vision for this SIA as a sort of systems of systems approach. And we lifted this quote from the SIA Applications and Extensions Manual that was released at the same time as the Central Framework, so way back in 2012, which talks about this as really a key source of what can make the SIA more policy relevant and more used to influence policy by the fact that the same principles and coverage and same framework can apply across a lot of different domains and to integrate a lot of different types of data. And I see that the possible benefits from this integration can affect all the sort of qualitative aspects of statistics that really influence policy relevance, whether it be the timeliness of our data or the time period, the coverage. All of the sort of policy relevant dimensions of the data can be improved, I think. And I'm just going to touch on a few basic examples, and then we'll hear some more in-depth examples from the other presenters just now. So here are perhaps some food for thought. These are just some of my own reflections from some of our work. These are not, specific recommendations or advice of the OECD. These are just my personal thoughts, some ideas that for cross-accounts integration, where perhaps we could do more. So for the first one, is linking policies and impacts. In fact, there was a proposal that came in to this seminar. It was not presented, but could have been, and maybe in the future from France, on linking the environmental activities accounting with the impacts of that work. And I think a lot more could be done, perhaps with our SIA, again, leveraging the coherence across accounts and across the statistics with economic statistics to try to link between the environmental economic policies and the impacts they have on the physical environment in practice. A second example, water accounts and ecosystems. We heard a lot of very interesting presentations on ecosystem accounts yesterday. A lot of the focus as a starting point was really focused on land, which of course makes a lot of sense as a building block for the ecosystem accounts and for the extent accounts. But I think water actually plays a similar role, whether it be the river basins or water as a function of being fundamental to life. And I feel like perhaps more could be done on this to boost some of the work on the ecosystem accounts, but also to make the work on water accounts more relevant. Because we see that actually water accounts have among the highest number of, in terms of coverage of countries, among the highest uptake of all the different types of CO accounts across countries. There have been criticism of how much are these accounts really used when aggregated at the national level, because, I think another advantage of perhaps linking this work to the ecosystem accounts, besides integrating the different types of data, is maybe it brings it closer, a little bit closer to how policy on managing our water resources is actually made. The third example, another topic we already heard quite a bit on, the circular economy. I mean, I think this is a natural example of how the SIA can play such a crucial role in bringing together data from a lot of different sources. Of course, just the different types of material flows across the whole range of flows, as you can see from inputs to throughput to the residuals, but also linking to the trade statistics. And we'll hear more about this in order to link production and consumption perspectives and for the footprint indicators. And then finally, on the drivers of climate change, a bit similar to the circular economy example. And I put together this basic graphic to just pick out 4 examples of 4 measurement topics, which can be derived from the different types of accounts from different perspectives. And so different measures, but with some overlap, but with some different perspectives, which I think creates a lot of interesting opportunities to improve measurement on these 4 topics, both in terms of the relevance, by creating opportunities for estimation to improve the different kind of quality dimensions that I mentioned a moment ago. Also to perhaps just improve the quality of the statistics overall through sort of cross-source validation. Then I wanted to turn to an example from our current work or upcoming work at the OECD, which was already mentioned by Santaro in the opening, which is this new data collections that we are launching for air emission accounts and for PEFA, so for the physical flows of energy. In fact, we already do a lot of work on the air emission accounts, but not via these questionnaires, and the work on the energy accounts will be new. And so these questionnaires will, in our case, will focus just on the OECD members not covered by the Eurostat collections, but through this partnership with the Eurostat and with the UN, it will have a global coverage of this work. And I think the interesting opportunity, though, from the OECD perspective, is to have these 2 data frames for the air emission accounts and the energy flow accounts together on the same team, in our team in the National Accounts Division, and looking at some of the opportunities to utilize that institutional integration of these two accounts to see what we can do, bringing those data sets together, and what kind of improvements maybe we can make to the statistics from also from a policy perspective. So, as I already mentioned, one basic advantage of integrated data is the possibility to do sort of cross-source validation, but also to create opportunities to use estimation, or to use the links between the data sets to produce new information, or to strengthen and fill gaps in the data. I wanted to mention the example of the link between the air emission accounts and inventories. We have a big demand to really emphasize this link to improve the uptake of the air emission accounts. Of course, I feel like often it's a bit of a misunderstanding in the air emission accounts, where sometimes our users see it as a sort of alternative reporting, or a different perspective compared to other forms of reporting like the inventories. Whereas, I think the correct way to look at it is providing a sort of additional information or value added to the emission statistics by linking to the economic statistics, and sort of adding more information to improve the relevance of this information for policy making. But of course, that argument only holds up when we maintain that link with the other reporting systems like the inventory. So it depends on having the bridging items. And so we do a lot of work in our team on the bridging items for the air emission accounts, and I think that work can really be boosted by having an integration between these two type of CA accounts in our team, since the emissions in the inventories, especially for the bridging items, which are the transport emissions, are based on the energy data. And related to that, I think there are a lot of opportunities, perhaps through integrating these two data sets to increase the granularity for analysis of both types of data. And a quick example, now this is based on the inventories data, because we've received requests to look into the breakdowns of the emissions according to energy or non-energy sources, or more precisely, fuel combustion or non-fuel combustion sources. And in fact, from the air emission accounts as we have them now, you cannot really do this type of analysis like is shown in the simple example of the screen. But by linking these two data sets, I think it opens up the possibility to do some kind of similar analysis like in the graph, but from the air emission accounts, and so therefore using the ISIC, or using the industry classification. Moving on back to the topic of integration of environment and economic statistics. So we had a bit of discussion this week about the during the discussion on the organizational issues yesterday afternoon, about the links to the SNA and the positioning of the SIA in statistical offices, but also in terms of communication. And I think one of the interesting ideas or objectives that are being promoted into the update of the SNA 2025 is to sort of integrate the SIA a little bit more into the work on the SNA itself. So sort of increase the profile of some of our work within the work of the economic statistics, or within the work on the SNA, rather than as more as a sort of a satellite system. And I think there are pros and cons to that, but I do think in general we could do more. And I'm speaking for my own institution at our work at the OECD, but also maybe for others, to communicate the information a little bit more, leveraging that integration. Okay, thank you. And also just a quick note on that. So what kind of things will be changed in the update to the SNA? this was discussed a little bit earlier. Again, I think conceptually there's this idea to put the SIA a little bit more centrally in the SNA itself. But then there's also this the enhanced work on inclusion of measurement of renewable energy resources. And there was a question in one of the sessions about strategies for measurement. We will need to respond to this demand. And I think that perhaps integration, for example, across the air emission accounts and the energy accounts, may be part of the solution to these emerging demands. Oh, wrong place. The last example, and there are a number of institutions that do work on inter-country input-output tables, but including at the OECD, and we meet with a team that works on this quite a bit, because they want to make maximum use of the air emission accounts for this works, which integrates the air emission accounts with other data sets, in particular the supply and use data and trade data. I think it's really important because it really creates a broader perspective of this information, to have both the consumption and production perspectives. I put a quick graph at the regional level there, but just to remind myself that we can go much more into depth on this information by individual countries and dig into the details of this data through the type of integration of data that I'm speaking about. So, for example, for OECD as a whole, is sort of net importers of CO2, but that's not true for all of the countries in the OECD. So, for example, in Canada and Korea, it's the opposite case. So, digging into the details is very interesting, but really requires leveraging this kind of integration that I'm speaking about. But the main request, by the way, when you speak to the researchers at OECD doing this work, is they want more expanded coverage of these accounts. So I think that's actually where the work really starts. First producing the accounts, and then to the integration. And I think that was my last slide. So thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for these reflections from the OECD side. Very interesting. I think you provided many interesting examples on linking SIA and also links to the SNA. And there's a lot of potential out there. So we're going to move on now with the first national example. So we have Clare O'Hara from Ireland that's going to talk about decoupling emissions from economic activity. And Clare will be presenting online. So I'm going to be a bit rude as the previous session chair and tell you when you have about 3 minutes left. So Clare O'Hara is a statistician in the Environment and Climate Division of the Central Statistics Office in Ireland. Her main area of work is in environment accounts, especially environmental subsidies, fossil fuel subsidies, and air emission accounts. So please, Clare, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Susanna. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about our work here today. Jerry Brady, who is there in person, and myself are currently working on a new statistical release on decoupling emissions from economic activity. And what we have in mind with this work is to look at kind of a time series of emissions data and national accounts economic data for the highest emitting sectors in Ireland, with a view to kind of monitoring whether success in reducing emissions, if achieved, will have a significant impact on the economic performance of these sectors. So just a quick outline in this presentation. First, I'll give you some background and context for our work. I'll outline some of the decisions we've reached about the approach that we are taking, and then I'll show you some examples of the kind of data and indicators that we're planning to include. So the main context for this work is Ireland's 2021 Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Act, which set national emissions targets based on 2018 emissions. The table here shows the 2030 reductions required for different sectors. So reductions of this magnitude, would obviously require transformation across the economy and society. And our idea is to try to use the environmental, social, and economic data held by the statistical system to assess the impact of this transformation. So to do this, we've decided to use a NACE sector approach, rather than the emissions inventory sectors, in order to align with national accounts data. And we've decided to focus on the NACE sectors with the highest emissions, as those are the sectors which can make meaningful and will have to make meaningful reductions. We look at indicators such as gross value added and employment over a time period of at least 10 years. And in later slides, I'll show you some examples of that data that we're planning to include. So first of all, I just want to mention some kind of similar and related work and ideas in this area. First of all, the emissions inventories are classified, by technical processes such as fuel combustion and transport, and they're usually combined by environmental protection agencies. Eurostat's air emissions accounts then are adjusted to align with national accounts and include a NACE sector classification. So we'll be using a NACE sector classification, and we'll also be keeping some information about the technical sources of the emissions in our work. So air emission accounts are based on a production approach, which includes emissions related to exported products and excludes emissions related to the manufacture of imported products. Eurostat further compile carbon footprint estimates, which include all emissions involved in making the final product, including those from imported products. Another interesting approach is to look at emissions intensity by NACE sector. Some decoupling analyses focus on kind of high output value and low emission sectors, which means kind of it's not focused on measuring progress then, towards reducing emissions. Some high emission sectors, may be able to reduce their emissions without changing their core activity. While other high emission sectors, such as the peat extraction industry, for example, would need to change their main economic activity in order to reduce emissions and comply with the targets. So our our analysis will require indicators that will, show whether progress is being made kind of closer to 2030, rather than necessarily showing kind of any interest, any dramatic changes in current data. We're looking for indicators that will reflect structural changes over the longer term, and our plan is to choose indicators that are tailored to each sector rather than taking a one-size-fits-all approach. We're very interested really in feedback or similar work by other national statistical offices, that would help to develop a more consistent approach, building on the broad range of data held by statistical offices, and to help us improve and build on our initial efforts in this area. Our initial report will include kind of the following chapters. A chapter to start with, providing some context in terms of these climate action plan targets, and then a chapter in each of the 5 highest emitting sectors in Ireland, and also a look then at environment taxes, environment subsidies, and fossil fuel subsidies, by kind of NACE or by environmental domain. So the rest of my slides then will just show some examples of the data that we're planning to make use of for the first 3 chapters shown there of our release. So we first kind of set the work in the context of the climate action plan targets, which I already showed you on the very first slide with the different sectoral targets. We then identify the highest emitting sectors and show emissions, gross value added, and employment by NACE for these sectors. For example, you can see here that 38% of emissions are from agriculture, which in Ireland is very important, for the rural economy, but only 1% of GVA and 4% of employment numbers nationally are from that sector. We also try to provide some further context in terms of increasing pressures. The emissions targets are to be achieved against a background of increasing population and life expectancy. And for example, Ireland's population increased by 35% from 1991 to 2016, and population projections show we should expect continued population growth to potentially over 6 million in 2051. So the sector with the highest emissions in Ireland is the agriculture sector, and the data we're planning to include here would be an annual time series showing agricultural emissions and the source of those emissions. We plan to show livestock numbers in terms of livestock units. I'll show you a graph of that in the next slide. And we'll show an annual time series of the emissions along with gross value added and employment data. We are trying to include indicators that kind of give the whole story or the bigger picture. So, for example, if emissions reductions are achieved in this sector, what will be the effect on the rural economy and society if that, involves significant loss in employment? And we're trying to show interactions between sectors. So we're hoping to include a supply use type table showing which would show that the main use of agricultural products is in the food manufacturing sector, and that means knock-on impacts if agricultural production is reduced. So this just shows a graph of livestock numbers, cattle and sheep numbers in terms of livestock units and emissions from the agriculture sector of that time period, 2010 to 2020. The next highest emitting sector is households as consumers. So this is obviously a little different to the NACE production sectors. For households, we will show emissions again by technical source, and I'll show you that on the next slide. And we hope to make use of building energy ratings, utility meter, and vehicle licensing data to examine the effects of emission reduction policies on households. Household emissions, as you can see here then, are mainly from household heating, from private cars, and from electricity consumption. And in 2020, 46% of household emissions were from heating, 32% were from transport, and there's a bit of a COVID effect there with people staying home more during the pandemic. So you can see in the previous years, maybe a more typical distribution, and you can see as well household emissions as a percentage of the total is now quite steady, but if you look back to 2010, it was a little higher at 31%. So for each of those, for heating, transport and electricity consumption, then we're going to try and use some of those data sets I just mentioned to kind of show the effects of emissions reduction policies. So new builds are increasingly using electricity as the main space heating fuel in Ireland, with transformation occurring in a short time period, as you can see there in the electricity column. New dwellings from 2015 to 2019, 49% of them used electricity as the main space heating fuel, and that increased again to 86% of new dwellings built in 2020 to 2022. So if the transition away from fossil fuels for electricity generation takes place, then obviously that's a positive development. Sorry, apologies, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah, so we're also using building energy ratings data. So, homes, we can see by combining building energy ratings data with metered electricity consumption data, we can see that homes with the best energy efficiency ratings do use less electricity per square meter. But also this brings in kind of the potential impacts on households here, where you can see there's a possible indicator of energy poverty, where the lowest rated homes also use less, electricity than the C, D and E rated homes. We have data from our environmental subsidies and similar transfers released showing the amounts of grants and tax reliefs for households for retrofits, electric vehicles and solar panels. These policy measures are part of the actions being taken to lower emissions, and you can see in the table the increase just even in the last few years, and we expect that, you know, to continue increasing as there are a lot of policy measures being introduced in this area and being ramped up. So far, electric vehicles still only make up 0.6% of tax private cars in 2020. And you know, the proportion of new vehicles obviously being electric vehicles is increasing, but it has yet to make a big impact in the overall fleet. So we also plan to include some data from our environment taxes, environment subsidies and fossil fuel subsidies releases. For example, we have a NACE sector breakdown on environment taxes, environment subsidies and air emission accounts. So we can combine some of that data to look at emissions by sector compared to, say, taxes being, energy taxes, for example, being paid by sector. We have data on fuel taxes per litre with a breakdown by type of energy tax. And that can show the extent to which governments are using carbon taxes as a policy instrument. So just to
2 minutes left, Clare.
Thank you, that's great, Susanna. So national statistical offices, you know, we will have the broad range of data that can be used for this purpose to monitor progress towards climate action targets and the ensuing effects on economic sectors. And the challenge is in choosing suitable indicators that can give a good picture of the trajectory that we're on. So really, I think, you know, the main thing we want to say today is that we're interested in working with and getting feedback from other national statistical offices on how, you know, they might use or how we can best use our official statistics to contribute to this area. And so thank you again for inviting me to talk. I know Jerry is there in person, and I think that he will take part in the panel discussion if that's okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Claire, for this presentation on decoupling. Your long-term perspective is very impressive, and we look forward to follow this work as we approach 2030. And of course, Jerry is very welcome to join the panel later. So now we move on to the next presenter, Nils Brown from Statistics Sweden, that's going to talk about the statistics to measure the climate change impact of a country's export. So Nils is an analyst at Statistics Sweden. He represents Sweden in several international groups linked to the UNCF, and he coordinates Statistics Sweden's work related to environmentally extended input-output analysis. And Nils holds a PhD in strategic and environmental analysis from KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology. So please, Nils, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Before I start, I'd like to take a few moments to offer my sincere thanks to the organisers and hosts for this meeting, in particular Mikael and to Caroline for their excellent work. It's been a fantastic meeting. It's fantastic to be in this room. It is a big room, but it's a very nice room. I'd also like to say the opportunity to come here and meet all of you in person has been fantastic, and to exchange experiences about the things that we care about, not least, of course, the system of environmental economic accounting, but much besides. With that said, I will go on with my presentation. As the title suggests, it's about the work we're doing at Statistics Sweden to measure the climate change impact of the country's exports. And what I mean by that will become apparent throughout the course of the presentation, I hope. So the background to the work at which we are just at the beginning of is that in the instructions that we at Statistics Sweden received from the government for 2023, there was a specific request, which is quite a seldom request for Statistics Sweden, a specific request that Statistics Sweden carry out a feasibility study with the aim, as you see on the screen, of suggesting a method to produce statistics to follow up the effect that exported products have on global emissions. And so as part of that, you will see in the bullet points lower down, that includes evaluating existing measures of the climate impacts of exports, and also to develop a new measure to measure the climate impact And specifically, I have some words in italics here, of course, to emphasize them, that it's the climate impacts of exported products compared to equivalent foreign products. Now, further background to this particular request that came from the government is the outcome of the report from an inquiry that was carried out by the Swedish Parliament's Cross-Parliamentary Committee on the Environmental Quality Objectives. As a long sentence, I will hereon refer to it just as the Swedish Parliament. But in the outcome of the inquiry, they noted 3 ways in which the exports can affect global emissions, and which is directing our project at the moment. So, as you see on the slide, the first way is this, that I've called the production phase. This isn't related to the notion that we have about production-based air emissions specifically, rather it's those emissions that can be considered that are linked to the production of specific products. So in this sense, global emissions can be affected where a particular country has lower or higher greenhouse gas emissions in their entire supply chain for a specific product X than the same product if it was produced in another country. The second way that was identified by the Swedish Parliament is in the use phase. That is to say, a particular product, which is X, produced in country Y, has a higher fuel efficiency. And in this case, I've exemplified it with a heavy-duty lorry. The third case is this system effect, where a product X, which is used in a wind power plant, which is produced in a country, is a key element in producing greenhouse gas-free electricity. Now, I mentioned these to show you the breadth that the Swedish government inquiry took in their investigation, as they also describe as a part of their 1,000-page inquiry report, is that we have the best access to data, and they showed the most data, specifically referring to the production phase. So as I talk more in the presentation, I will be focusing on this that I've called the production phase in this slide. Now, from the initial work and investigation that we've done into methods for measuring the greenhouse gas impacts from a country's exports, we've identified 3 specific potential methods. And I show them here because initially we judge, and it will be interesting to hear your reflections on this, that they do have the potential to meet policy-relevant statistical needs. At the same time, it's clear from the results of the initial survey that they are at very different stages of maturity in terms of their potential for being used to produce official statistics and to follow up policy-relevant areas. So, and I also mentioned them because they raise different aspects of this particular measure of measuring the climate impacts from a country's exports. So considering the first area, input-output analysis, as I will go on, this is an area where there are well-established data and methods that we have at Statistics Sweden. They're already being used to produce statistics, and we have a macroeconomic perspective. The area of life cycle assessment, that is there because in relation actually to an issue that was raised earlier on in this seminar by Eurostat, it is there because the European Commission, through principally the JRC, they are using a life cycle assessment approach to judge specifically consumption. There's also research work going on to judge the climate impacts of exports, and they are also incorporating a large number of official statistics in the input data. The third method that I've identified there is on the screen specifically because we note that in the ongoing policy development processes for the CBAM, that is to say the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, there are requirements to report greenhouse gas related data for imports which are related to statistical standards, in particular the combined nomenclature that's used for imports and exports. At the same time, these second 2 methods that I note on the screen, they are certainly at a much earlier stage in their maturity. So when I go on and I present more about the current findings, I will talk specifically about work that is based on input-output analysis. And when we look at it, one of the criteria that we'll be starting from is the potential for the measures to fulfill the code of practice for European statistics, and also the quality requirements that exist for official statistics. So with this slide, I want to show you that at Statistics Sweden, we are already producing statistics about the product-wise environmental pressures and greenhouse gas emissions in this particular context from Sweden's exports. These are results which are produced using the input-output modeling that we use to produce official statistics on greenhouse gas emissions for Sweden from a consumption perspective. These are done on a product-wise basis. We have a modeling method that builds on 91 different product groups. We also use a global multi-regional input-output method in order to judge the impacts that are arising from imports, and in this particular case, of course, it's products that are imported into Sweden for re-export after further manufacturing. Now, a proposition that arises in research, which we have looked at, which is raised by the Swedish Parliament in the results of their inquiry extensively, this is the potential to compare the product-wise environmental impacts that arise in Sweden with the international average production intensity. And the proposition, according to researchers, is that by so doing, you can reward countries that do have an improved environmental efficiency in their export sectors. There's also the term that is used, the environmental competitive advantage that can be achieved by so doing. I note also on the screen some references to some of the scientific work that has been done in the area, which we are investigating and analysing in terms of their potential to be able to produce official statistics. So in light of this, we can see in this graph, I have in the light blue bars, you will see essentially the same data shown in the previous figure that I showed, which are the greenhouse gas emissions from Sweden's exports calculated according to Swedish intensities, according to the method that we use to produce the official statistics on consumption-based emissions. The dark blue bars, those are Sweden's exports calculated as world average intensities. I should note that these are only indicative figures at the moment. That is because we have not used our full modelling capability to do so, so they're not official statistics. That's the reason for there being a watermark saying that they're a draft in there. But it does give you a good idea of the orders of magnitude, and it suggests that Sweden, in terms of producing export products, does have a lower greenhouse gas intensity than other countries. One potentially significant reason for that is that the greenhouse gas intensity of the Swedish economy is considerably lower than many other producing nations, thanks to almost 100% renewable carbon dioxide-free electricity. And I've given the sources for the data there on the screen. And I'm showing this figure now, and this is a figure which I've essentially copied from the Swedish Parliament's inquiry. And this is their judgment about the results from some of the research. And so they suggest, according to the quote that I show you on the screen, that Sweden's exports lead to reduced global emissions according to researchers' calculations and assumptions. And I think I present it because I perceive this particular figure to be very different from a statistical perspective compared to the figure which I showed before. I'd certainly be very interested in hearing your reflections about that and the potential to present this as official statistics in light of the quality and scientific requirements that we have for official statistics. So with that, I will conclude the presentation. We certainly have many technical issues to resolve as we work further in the project. We will present our final report to the new Swedish Ministry for Business and Climate Change in the beginning of 2024. And we have many technical issues to resolve before then. But I will leave you with these questions. And as I noted, we would love to hear your reflections today, and we can incorporate that in our ongoing work, not least, of course, because this involves exports, which is a matter where international communication and collaboration, we think, is very significant. So is it feasible to produce statistical measures of the climate impacts of exported products compared to equivalent foreign products? We judge that such a measure will always be complementary to existing ones. the territorial emissions, the production-based emissions, consumption-based emissions? And in which case, do they provide valuable extra information for policy? Finally, another issue which has come up previously in the seminar is the question of the extent to which further harmonization and standardization of global multi-regional input-output tables will support the adoption of these indicators. On that note, I thank you very much for the time. It's certainly been a great pleasure to present to you. I look forward to receiving questions and to sitting in the panel. Back to you, Susanna. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nils. We do have a lot of work ahead of us this year. It's very exciting. We look forward to hearing your comments also from the audience later. But first, we're going to have the last presentation from Netherlands and Redbad Mosterd on carbon accounts. So Redbad is from Statistics Netherlands, CBS, and he has been working there for 3 years. He has a master's degree in environmental economics from, Wageningen University. Topics he works on are ecosystem accounting, air emissions, and material flows. So please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you for the introduction. Is it working? Oh yeah, okay. Thank you for the introduction. So I only started my career 3 years ago. It was in March 2020. And I think after 1 week, we went into the lockdown due to COVID. So this is really my first introduction into the international community of environmental economic accounting. So I'm very happy to be here. It's been a great experience and to meet all of you. One of the first projects that I started working on was the carbon account or the carbon stock account. So today I will tell you a little bit about how we compiled it and what you can use it for. Okay, so I have to tell you a little bit about the context and the framework. There are 4 areas that I will try to cover in just this 15 minutes. And in the end, I will talk about the policy relevance and a lot of issues that we're still working on. Yesterday, we already saw a really nice example from Australia on regional implementation of this carbon account. What we are trying to do is to implement this on a national scale. So I will tell you how we did that. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about the carbon account and the framework. So we try to capture all of the flows and changes in the stocks, and not only from human activities, so in the economy, but also in the natural processes. So we also include biocarbon, geocarbon. We try to capture it all. And this builds upon existing carbon reporting systems, such as the air emission accounts, IPCC emissions, LULUCF, and it's actually part of the SIA ecosystem accounting. So they have the extend account condition and the services, but they also have some thematic accounts which are focused around a specific policy topic. One of them is climate change. Another one we saw also yesterday is biodiversity. And these thematic accounts, they try to integrate a lot of data on the environmental accounts, not only from ecosystem accounting, but also other accounts such as air emissions, waste accounts, and others. Let's see. So this is the general structure. As you can see, there are 5 areas in which carbon can be found and which are flows. The atmosphere, biosphere, in the economy, geosphere, and the oceans. I will talk to you today about 4 of them. The oceans, we have left it out because we didn't have sound data or the time to compile this as well, but the other 4 are relevant, also from a policy perspective. So I will discuss these one by one, and it's still quite experimental. So the data that I will show you today is data from 2018. I compiled it 2 years ago. And I will start with the biosphere. And when I do this, I have to say that this data is not compiled by Statistics Netherlands alone. We work together with Wageningen University. It's also the university that I graduated from. We work together with 2 experts on this field. So when presenting this, I have to give them the credits as well. We're really happy that we can work with them on ecosystem accounting. I think it has been really added value to have them also working with our team. So the biocarbon, we include all the organic carbon in the biosphere. You can see it in the picture there. So we look at stocks and also the flows. The most important ones can be shown here. So we have a stock above the ground, the biomass, vegetation, which has some carbon sequestration. And we have a stock below the ground, and we take the first 30 centimeters. And these soils, especially in the Netherlands, when we have a lot of peat soils that are used for agricultural purposes, they have a lot of emissions. And we try to quantify all of these and also have some regional distributions. So how do we compile this? We started with the ecosystem extent account, as you can see here on the left. And we combine this with a lookup table. So this lookup table consists of a lot of different sources. Some are calculated by Wageningen University, other ones are from other literature data. And we look for every type of ecosystem. We have a sequestration rate. And of course, this have a lower and an upper boundary. For the maps, we use the mean because there are many factors influencing this sequestration rate. So sometimes you can see that the upper and lower boundaries are quite large. And we also have these for the stocks. And we're currently working on new methods to do this. But this is from 2 years ago. And when we combine these, we get these kind of results. So on the left, you see the carbon sequestration, which is also an ecosystem service. So we include this as well in the services. We also do some monetary calculations with it, which I won't present today, but we do have them. And on the right, you see, just to illustrate that we also do this for the carbon stock. So they're quite similar. Of course, you can see in the central area, there is a lot of forest, which take up a lot of carbon. And besides these two maps, we also have maps on soil emissions from the peatlands, because in the Netherlands, most peatlands are subject to various sorts of agricultural practices. And one big topic in the Netherlands currently is how we manage the groundwater levels, because currently they're kept quite low, and this leads to a lot of problems, but we do it so that the farmers can still use agricultural land so they can drive their machines, but it gives some problems to both nature and urban areas. The city where I live, we have a lot of problems with this because the groundwater levels are so low. Actually, the houses, some parts they sink, sometimes 3 to 7 millimeters per year. So, well, after quite some years, this adds up. And today we have the elections, so provincial elections, but one thing that we can vote for is the water boards. And these water boards, they are responsible for managing also the groundwater levels. So it's quite an interesting topic in the Netherlands, and especially today, it's a lot in the news. So these maps can be quite relevant for that. So the geosphere, we'll keep this quite short because of the time. We looked at the geocarbon, so all the carbon that is locked in the lithosphere, either organic or mineral form. Here you can see an example of how such a table looks like. You already saw it yesterday. There are opening stocks, reductions, additions, and then an important indicator is the net carbon balance, and we have a closing stock. There's one issue here that we are sometimes struggling with. We want to report on the total stock according to the framework. That's how we should do it, but we only have the data for the stocks that are economically and socially extractable. And one issue here that especially in the recent years in the Netherlands has become an issue is that these extraction, especially of natural gas in the northern region, leads to a lot of earthquakes, so small and bigger earthquakes, which actually has damaged a lot of houses. So the government decided to cut back on this extraction. So this also means that the stock available for extraction went down, and you can see that here in the graph, a downward reappraisal. It's pretty big. This doesn't say anything about the total stock that is in the ground, but just that what we expect that we can extract economically and politically. The next part is on the economy. This is the part that I worked on the most. It's also where we integrate the most environmental accounts. Just to give you an idea of what this is, it's about capturing carbon in the economy for a longer period of time. So for at least 1 year, you can think of products like plastic products or bitumen in roads or wood that is used in construction works. instead of burning it, for example, or materials and furniture, or if it's in waste dumps for a longer period of time. And so this is quite difficult. The main data source that we have is the material flow monitor, which we compiled for the first time in, I think, 2016. It's different from the material flow accounts, which many of you might be familiar with, which looks at what goes into the economy and what goes out of the economy. And it kind of leaves the economy as itself as somewhat as a small box, or black box. And the material flow monitor opens this and looks at all the flows, physical flows within the economy. And then we combine it with a lot of different accounts, as you can see here. And so then we have the physical flows in kilograms. And the next thing that we have to do is to combine this with carbon content coefficient. So how much carbon is stored in 1 kilogram of that specific product group. And sometimes this is pretty straightforward, and other times it can be difficult if you think of furniture, for example, which is made out of wood and a combination of plastics. And so you have to kind of know a little bit about the materials that are inside a product group. And because of this material flow monitor, we know most of the flows, but the stocks are still difficult sometimes. And this material flow monitor, we make it from the supply and use tables, from the national accounts, the monetary tables, and we transform them from euros to kilograms, also with conversion factors. And this gives us 130 sectors, 350 products, including waste, extraction, and CO2 emissions. And again, we integrate this with many other statistics, international trade, waste, energy, etc. And usually when we explain this in the Netherlands, we use this example, which might be quite Dutch, but you have all these different statistics, and when you put them together, you can make the bicycle. So we really put them together to present a nice overview in a comprehensive way. And just to show you some of the results, we also have big tables, but for now I will just use the Sankey. Here you can see the carbon flows within the Dutch economy in 2018. We made a division between bio-based fossil fuels and other. And you can see the interesting things here is in the middle you see accumulation or the stocks. This is how much carbon is captured in buildings or in products, in furniture for a longer period of time. Something that you can also see here is the waste cycle. So you see waste is about 16 megatons of carbon, and we're actually able to reuse 11 of these 16, so that's quite a lot, and they flow back into the economy. So this is just an example. So the last one is the atmosphere, which is mostly a receiving environment. So we have some additions to the stocks, of course, the emissions from the activities and economic activities, but we also have the emissions from, for example, respiration of humans and livestock, and emissions from soil, which are important in the Netherlands. And of course, some reductions from carbon sequestration. And of course, we have to estimate the stocks, which is quite difficult because it's quite difficult to know the stocks that we have put into the atmosphere, and we used an estimate. We have cumulative carbon emissions from 1860. This is only due to economic activities, so it's an underestimation because we don't have the stocks of the natural processes. This is something we're still working on. And when you combine this, you just get a table like this. So you see the stocks in yellow, and then some additions, reductions. You can see that the most important, of course, is the emissions due to economic activities, burning of fossil fuels. But you can also see, you put in perspective what the effect of the sequestration and the emissions from biocarbon, so the soils, is. So now I've talked about all the 4 areas. Of course, we can put them together in the framework. You get something like this. I know it's quite a big table. I don't know how well you can see it. The important parts here are, you can see in the top the 4 areas that we just discussed, and you can see the net carbon balance. We have this per area. So again, in the geocarbon you see the biggest changes, but this is mostly due to policy. I will quickly talk about the policy relevance. So what can we use it for? Like I said, it's still experimental. We're very focused on the technical parts and improving it, so we can actually use it. So we hope to use it for measuring progress towards specific policy actions in the field of climate change, especially the biocarbon, because we have spatial explicit results, which can really help on a local scale as well. And it helps also to measure progress towards circular economy and low carbon economy. So while it comes from the ecosystem accounting, it's actually also, there's a lot of interest from the circular economy as well. So that's one of the advantages of integrating these accounts, that it can be used for a lot of different fields of policy. And lastly, to wrap it up, we have some issues that we're still working on. A lot of them are technical. So we still have the gaps. So the carbon stocks in the economy, they remain quite difficult to estimate. The carbon content coefficients, we have them for all product groups, but some are just educated guesses. For others, we have databases. We still need to validate these. And I talked about geocarbon. Two other things that we are currently working on are the ocean accounts. So maybe we can also fill that gap quite soon. And we are working on the forest accounts. So we hope that the first ones are finished this year. So it will be interesting to see how we can integrate the new results from the forest accounts into this carbon stock framework as well. And the last thing that we should work on is to develop indicators for policy use. Because now I showed you we did this for 1 year. A lot of times the policymakers are, of course, interested in longer time series. We also did some, we wrote the code for this in R, so it should be quite easy to reproduce. And it would be nice to have some more indicators. And so with that, I think I talked for a little over 15 minutes. But thank you for your attention. And yeah, I'm looking forward to some questions that you might have. So back to you.
Thank you. Very interesting to learn more about these carbon accounts, and the links to spatial data that you showed were also very interesting. I also noted down that I need to study a bit more on the material flow monitor. I think that would be very interesting for us in Sweden as well. We get a lot of questions from our data users on this. So now we are done with all the presentations, so we move on to the panel discussion and Q&A. And I wondered, Jerry, if you want to join us up here? I would like to start with a question to all the presenters here regarding what so far has been the main lessons learned from your work, and if you have anything you want to share or recommendations you want to share with others. So perhaps, Jerry, if you want to go first.
Well, I think we learn by doing. So when I heard the presentation from Shord on the first day about the decomposition approach, and then Nils' presentation today and Redbad, you know, we are looking at them and listening and gaining ideas. So I think this is a good way to make progress, rather than to wait and wait until you feel very, very confident. You know, to move a little bit quicker and learn from each other and pick up the good ideas and drop the bad ones. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very good advice to pick up the good ideas. So, Redbad, do you want to go ahead? Do you have anything you want to share on main lessons learned?
Yes, we learned quite a bit by this. Of course, like being said, it's quite experimental. So, I mean, a lot of things you have to figure out by yourself. So what we learned, because we are integrating a lot of different accounts, and what we noticed is that we can do it as fast as our slowest account. So you're always, by integrating a lot of them, you're very dependent on these other accounts and when are they done. And I think timing is very important. Because what we do for example, the material flow monitor, there's a lot of interest from this in the field of circular economy, and actually the ministry is, well, they are funding this work, but of course they have very strict deadlines, so we're always trying that we need to get the results from all of the other accounts at the right time, which can be very challenging sometimes. And another thing that we learned is when you put all of these accounts together, you really face problems with, for example, consistency between the modules, because a lot of them are compiled separately. So, for example, we looked a lot at the energy accounts and the air emission accounts. They looked quite well, but when we put them together and we actually looked at how they were divided between the economic sectors, we started to see some weird things, that sectors that produce a lot of emissions but didn't actually burn that many fuels, or the other way around. So when we put them together, it actually led to a lot of improvements in the single accounts. And I think that's the added value. So we actually improve the consistency in the single environmental accounts by putting them together. That's when we learned how good they actually were. So that's what I wanted to add on this.
Yeah, thank you very much for those reflections. Very useful. And Nils, we have just started this work on the export project, but if you want to reflect a bit already now on challenges or main recommendations, please go ahead.
Of course, I'd be very happy to. Well, I'd take the opportunity to really reiterate and maybe give another perspective on some of the features that I mentioned in the presentation. So the opportunity to perform this work thanks to the instructions that we received from the government for 2023, that I think has given us the option really to evaluate from a much broader perspective than we've otherwise had the opportunity to do in the development of a new statistic. I think that's been very valuable, and the opportunity to link up with these approaches that haven't yet been incorporated for the production of statistics. As I note, in the short term, we are looking at the areas where we're strong. That's to say, using the input-output modelling approaches, where we have a specific expertise at Statistics Sweden. At the same time, we do see potential in the possibility in the longer term to be able to incorporate features of life cycle assessment and to incorporate the data that we can see will be being produced in conjunction with the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So that has certainly been a key learning. Of course, we are very grateful to the opportunity to perform this project. We've also expressed previously, actually what I will say is that more broadly, where we've been able to develop the expertise that we have, that has specifically been through extensive collaboration, specifically within Sweden. We're very grateful to receive financing from the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency for a multi-year research program about 5 years ago, which was called the PRINCE program. Thanks to that program, we had the opportunity to collaborate with researchers inside Sweden and internationally. And the results of that program have been the basis for the modeling that we do in input-output assessment, input-output analysis. So that's been very valuable. And in the project that we're currently carrying out on exports, we are in touch with other government agencies. We look forward to receiving input from them about moving forward with the specific measures that we're proposing. We're also in touch with businesses in Sweden to understand their perspectives. So that I would sum up.
Yeah, that was a nice summary. Thank you. And also, if you would like to reflect a bit on this, Daniel, from your perspective.
Sure, just very quickly. I mean, I certainly relate to the theme of learning by doing. It certainly applies to all of the work that we have done with these data sets, the data sets that we receive that are from official statistics, and then trying to integrate this information with other data sets. Learn a lot through this process, but I think it extends as well beyond the work of production of statistics, but also on, I think we need to, from my learning is the feeling like we need to do more on as well on the applications of the statistics and analysis of some of our results so it's learning by doing, but also learning by showing and demonstrating and communicating some of our results. And I think that this is, in fact, maybe a key role for the OECD in a lot of cases, is to try to help create that link between the results from our work and the value of our work with policy, because I think it's not always so convincing to all of our audience or to our funding sources and whatnot to repeat this argument of the importance and the value of integrated data. We need to more and more work in my team to really demonstrate that value through more work on some of these applications that we were talking about and some of this research. But it is a big investment of time, but you learn a lot by doing, and so that's how I feel at this moment that I've learned.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And now I would like to open the floor for questions from the audience here in this room, or if we have anything in the chat. Yes, please go ahead, Armenia.
Thank you, presenters. It was really very interesting, very much. My first question I want to ask to Netherlands. You involved institutions, researchers into accounts. What do you think? Can statistics work be continuous for making future accounts when you involve additional resources? Of course, it's great to involve researchers, scientists. It's a good idea to have advanced information analyzing, but when you involve additional, or you have agreement for continuous work, cooperation with them, and does it need additional funding? This is for you. And the next one to Nils. I think you were talking about bringing SEA to SNA. This is maybe a general question. What do you think? Is this up to national statistics to make this decision, or it could be a recommendation from Eurostat or somewhere that it will be accepted by the country? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one more question from Georgia before I leave the word back to the presenters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to thank all presenters and panelists for very interesting and very useful presentations and discussions. So I have a question to Redbad from Statistics of Netherlands. Yes, you during your presentation mentioned that you integrate data from other environmental accounts. Not only you talk about carbon accounts, but you integrate also other environmental accounts. So we all know that availability of comprehensive and reliable data and information are critically important for evidence-based decision-making process, and so this integration of data is very important from environmental point of view. First question is, are you provider of all environmental data, which accounts which are you integrate? And second question, which method is used, methods is used for this integration? I see somehow a bit challenging this part, because in Georgia's case, the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture is mainly producer of environmental data, and I think you probably have some statistical data and statistical methods, and could you please provide a bit more information about these methods? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Redbad, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. So I will first address the question of Armenia about the cooperation with the university and the funding. We are funded mostly by the Ministry of Agriculture, and we're funded by sometimes by Eurostat grants. And we have been working with Wageningen University for about 6 or 7 years. But yeah, we do have well, it's a problem, but the universities are mostly interested in new researches, so new fields, and less in updating regularly statistics. So yeah, we have this discussion with them. So actually, we're currently discussing with them about an agreement because we see the value of their work. But yeah, they say to us, okay, we have these methods, and yeah, if we give you the data and the method, you can update it yourself. So it's always we always have to discuss whether we will continue doing it or they will continue doing it. I think on some parts, if it's challenging enough for them to work on it, if they have the opportunity to look into new possibilities, then they are usually happy to do it. We have a really close line with them, and they really see the value of ecosystem accounting because they do a lot of research in this topic as well. But every time we start a new cycle, so a new project, yeah, we have to discuss with them what we're going to do, and actually we're quite in the middle of this right now. So it is challenging, but as long as you convince them about the goal and you provide them enough chances to increase the quality, then in our experience they are very much willing to help. And the question from Georgia about the integration of the different accounts. Most of these environmental accounts, they come from our team. So some of them come from other parts within Statistics Netherlands, like international trade. Organizationally, we are part of the national accounts, so we work together with them. And a big source for us is the supply and use tables in monetary terms. So we are actually on the same division, so we have an easy access to that. And a lot of them, like the waste accounts, energy accounts, air emission accounts, we all compile them ourselves. We don't, of course, collect the data, but we compile the accounts. So we have a lot of knowledge about these accounts. And maybe to come back to the bicycle example, all these accounts, they have to be of, well, good quality. I mean, if you have 2 different sizes of wheels, then you get a really weird bike. So we always look at the quality of the accounts. And one other issue that I didn't really mention is when you put them together in this framework, one thing we do is to match the supply and the use, which when you combine 10 different statistics is never the case. So we have to modify them a little bit in order for it to have the balance. But then a problem that is there that they start to deviate from the original data. So it can be quite challenging to do this. But as long as we know what we are doing and we can also communicate this to users, why you see sometimes a little bit of change because we want everything to be balanced and consistent, then I think it works. But maybe we have the advantage that most of the statistics come from either our team or somewhere else in Statistics Netherlands. So thank you for your questions.
Thank you. And then I think we had one question that was directed to you, Daniel.
Yes. So thank you for the question. It's a challenging one. I think that whether we are speaking about sort of just communication or this organization of a statistical work or anything in between, it's very context specific. And in my opinion, my personal opinion, there's no, I would be skeptical that there's a sort of one size fits all recommendation on this sort of integration or of the SNA and SIA work that Eurostat or the UN or somebody could give to all countries. I don't know if that's feasible, but because every country is very different. But what I was trying to say about the update to the SNA is in the discussions on the revision to the SNA, which OECD is very much involved. This is a theme of the discussion, I would say, especially with increased emphasis of measuring production in net terms. And in the example I gave about the increased role of information on renewable energy, and this was a challenge to us, those who work on the SIA, because we will need to deliver this information, new measurements related to the renewable energy, and also on monetary valuation in order to respond to this. So yes, I mean, I think there are a lot of advantages to enhancing our integration with the, I mean, in a sense, that's really the point of the SIA work, but there are new challenges coming all the time. And so how we're going to address that, maybe it depends on the country, though.
Thank you very much. I see three more questions. So we have Estonia and FAO in Germany. So please try to be brief. Estonia, please go ahead.
Does it work? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So I also, when we started our analysis, we really liked this SIA extensions and applications. So this part, I think this should be kind of updated, and as times are changing, like you were saying, and we do not do that kind of analysis as you do, but so we do not have currently this as a priority, but I'm always amazed of the work which the OECD is doing, and Maura and Miguel, the analysis. So thank you. We quote this analysis what you do for countries and also about our country and others. So you use your results of your analysis, and also what Eurostat is doing in this area. So it has been very useful also for our policy. But Nils had a question to the audience. What do you think of these graphs, two graphs? And wasn't it? You had a direct question. And what was on a slide? Can you put this one on? And it was comparing Sweden exports with equivalent foreign products, international average production intensity, and there were conclusions made by Swedish parliaments about the issue. And on the first graph, you said that showed that in average, your export is less carbon intensive, yes. And on the second one, there is a conclusion that Sweden's exports lead to reduced global emissions according to the researchers' calculations and assumptions. And you asked whether this is correct, this assumption made. One further up or two, wasn't it? So was this the question? Yeah, that one. So whether the question, so it was questioned, you asked for the audience, what do you think of it? And I think this, if you ask like this, so I guess this is, it seems that the sentence is wrong. Yeah, okay. Yeah, sentence is wrong, and so it could be right if it would have said. So semantic is important how you talk about the figures. So Sweden's export lead to relatively lower global emissions. So this is what you can say, but it doesn't lead to reduced global emissions. As if you reduce it in absolute terms, when it's where it's lower emissions. But here you can, if it would have said relatively lower, then it would have been correct. Is that what you wanted us to notice on these graphs, or was it something different?
Yes. So, can I continue, or? Okay, so that is largely the account that you presented, Kai, is largely certainly reflects a lot of the discussions that Susanna and I have had with colleagues about the issue of making a statistical measurement, about the extent to which we need to reflect, well, as we tend to call it, sustainability science broadly, and the idea that if you look further in the text in the inquiry, there's a lot of discussion about using that differential that I showed, say, on this slide. And then, for example, incorporating that differential with territorial goals or a potential consumption-based goal. And from a statistical and sort of sustainability science perspective, you know, that doesn't seem to be something which is leading us towards a 1.5 degree world. You know, as a producer of statistics, again, issues that we discuss, you know, we do aim to produce it according to the highest scientific standards, and that's something that certainly plays in when we produce the statistics. At the same time, you know, the democratically elected parliament in Sweden is, of course, sovereign as well, and so that is a factor that weighs in when we are making our data. I think I'm certainly a lot happy with presenting data according to the figure that is shown now than the figure that is shown now. So thank you very much for your reflection. We will note it and we will share it with the Swedish Parliament. Can I come in on that?
Yes, please go ahead, Jerry.
Clare showed that agriculture is the main emitter in Ireland, and when Nils read out the sentence, I had heard it before, but it was for livestock farming in Ireland, that there would be an argument that a country that can produce on a more energy efficient, emissions efficient basis, that they could become a specialized producer for the world or for the European Union. So because farming in Ireland is outdoor grass based, that we would produce dairy and beef products for a large part of the European Union. So instead of taking every country must take the same reduction approach, the country that was more efficient with lower emissions would specialize and produce the goods for a country that had higher emissions with the same activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, for that reflection. I think we have time for just a short question, so please go ahead, FAO.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I give my congratulations to all speakers, the ones present and ones away and online for the presentations. And I'd like to share with you some thoughts regarding the presentation from the Netherlands. When you have these metrics with the breakdown of CO2 emissions by activities, economic activities, and different kinds of carbon, different source of carbon, I'd like to suggest to you, could we translate those figures in some kind of an information that tells you the marginal rate of transformation of one output in one activity by one output on the other activity? Meaning, which also very much related to the comment of our colleague of Ireland, I guess one addition of carbon unit, and I stop, from one activity generates different output of the activity. So if you want to penalize, not to penalize, if you want to do in economics, to say a sort of rationing, you can emit this amount of carbon units in the Netherlands, and this is lower than the existing, then you could indicate which sectors that reduction of carbon is associated with a lower reduction of output. But congratulations to all of you, and this information is quite nice, this disentangling between economic activities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to reflect on that?
Yeah, so just a really, really short answer. Thank you for your comments. It would be really interesting to do this. I know for the air emission accounts, we already combine this with economic activity. So we actually calculate the emission intensities for different sectors. So we do have it, but we have not combined it with this specific carbon account. I think it would be quite interesting as maybe a next step. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, I think we are starting to run out of time for this very interesting session. I take my take-home message is learning by doing and learning by communicating with others. And a setting like this is also very great for sharing examples and experiences. So very many thanks to